What's she up to now? Previously, I tested out various cadences on the turbo and experienced some interesting results, particularly on the low cadence front, where I found myself able to produce an effort on par with normal cadence at a lower perceived exertion. I told myself I wouldn't do it, but curiosity got the better of me, so obviously it had to be done. This experiment was essentially just cycling up a climb as hard as possible whilst maintaining around 60 RPM. So just the one trial this time, purely in the interest of preserving your patience and definitely nothing to do with the fact that I really couldn't be bothered with 100 RPM. The main goal was to see if any of the benefits experienced from low cadence riding on the turbo translated to real life road riding. The climb here is Col de Braus.
Col de Braus.
The Braus.
Col de Braus.
I still don't know how to say it. It's one of the most popular climbs in the vicinity of Nice and connects the communes of Sospel and L'Escaron. It's a great ascent from either side, but I took the L'Escaron approach, which is the better known way to tackle it. Averaging roughly 6% for 10 kilometers, the gradient is relatively consistent and it's just an all-around good quality road, which limited the number of potential external factors. I've done a fair few full gas efforts up here over the years, so intended to use my PR of just over 29 minutes as a measure of how successful the effort was. In a shocking turn of events, we actually have a few different camera angles today, despite a rocky start featuring a few mishaps to get it all functional. Okay, is it still recording? But I'll never stray far from my bodging enthusiast roots, and soon enough I set off from L'Escaron. If you want to learn more about the climb itself, or maybe if you're looking for something to quickly send you to sleep, you can check out one of my earliest videos. But to provide a little more background info about Col de Braus, it's the training ground for a lot of Monaco and Nice-based pros, and also featured in the penultimate stage of last year's Tour de France. So as you can imagine, the leaderboard is quite a rapid one. This side of the pass is a good one to ride in winter, as it profits from ideal sun direction, keeping it nice and warm. The main road there continues up Col de Tournai, but peeling off to the right, you're just a few seconds away from starting the climb up Braus. The start point should be incredibly obvious, but I always find myself second guessing it because the road stays very gradual and it doesn't really feel like you've started climbing for a little while. So I started off a bit conservatively, but this also allowed me to adjust and settle into the cadence. Straight off the bat, I can tell you that cadence has no bearing on the phenomena experienced on every climb ever, where you put in a solid 6 or 7 minutes of work only to look down at your Garmin and realise that you've only been going for a minute. I've made it at least 10 seconds into the climb without saying it, but my legs were not feeling great. I'd been doing a lot of tough riding the preceding days, weeks, months. My legs have been tired for years. So I wasn't intending on taking this too seriously, mainly because I wasn't really expecting to get a PR at such a silly cadence. So there was a definite lack of nerves and adrenaline, which usually come with the decision to attempt a hard effort up a mountain. I set my PB in 2023, 2 years ago. I hadn't attempted to improve on that since, mainly because I didn't think I'd be able to, and you kind of need to really be up for it and have a lot of motivation if you want to have a decent ride. So the thought of doing a full gas effort was not appealing at all, but for some weird reason I was excited to come and do this funny little test, with no expectation as to how it would actually go. I only had time, distance and cadence displayed on my Garmin, so I wasn't riding to power at all, but by this point I know more or less how to ride and pace myself, even though it was definitely harder to gauge at 60 RPM. Initially I spent quite a bit of time out of the saddle, but soon abandoned that as I could really feel the wind in my face. Even though the aerodynamic costs wouldn't have been too great, as I was only travelling at around 20 kilometers an hour, it just felt like a waste of energy to be standing bolt upright. The standing up and stomping technique was a fairly major component of my indoor experiment, so there's already quite a major departure from my method of getting out the power. I'll touch more on that in a minute, but passing through to de l'Escaron, you can see another challenge that comes with rolling around at a low cadence out on the road. which is that every slight change in gradient is massively magnified. It only takes a small gradient drop-off to quickly put you at 75 RPM, and on the other side of that, if the road steepens just a bit, you might find yourself suddenly pushing an unsustainable 300 watts at 55 RPM. Even just a percent or two is super perceptible, which made it difficult to find a rhythm. I was hoping I would be able to more or less just select a gear and churn up the mountain, but I had to stay pretty focused and on top of gear changes to ensure that my cadence stayed right around that golden 60. In my indoor experiment, I was of course using erg mode, so didn't have to shift at all, but even when riding at full resistance indoors, the slight variations are nowhere near as noticeable, and much less of a consideration. Road feel and aerodynamics weren't the only reasons that I couldn't emulate the upright indoor technique. It's kind of crazy, but believe it or not, you do actually have to look where you're going and sometimes even steer. Oops, gotta watch out for those snowplows on the Côte d'Azur and the nice mouthful of dust they blow up. So dealing with hairpins is similar to gradient in the sense that it doesn't take much to knock things out of whack, and little changes you normally wouldn't even consider or notice, such as micro braking and accelerating, is definitely more annoying than it would be at a higher cadence. For example, you might have to brake slightly more than anticipated and then have to push through a really big gear at 30 RPM to get back up to speed. Once again, this is all in the context of trying to hold a fairly rigid cadence of 60. If you're just aiming to ride low cadence in a more general sense, maybe allowing some higher cadence during technical sections, this would all be much less relevant. If I were doing that, I would also be inclined to spin a bit more on flatter sections. Ultimately, I do think that varying your cadence and using different muscle groups every now and then is the most optimal way to ride, even if it's just to give your muscles some brief relief. I've got to say it was a bit embarrassing to be seen riding like this, and I'm kind of glad there weren't more cyclists out. Probably looked like I was trying to imitate the pros and the 40 RPM torque intervals, or whatever the current trend is. This is a pretty cool bit of the climb, about 3 kilometers in, where you swing around and get a real sense of the landscape as the road flattens for a short time. So we're approaching the most recognisable part of the climb, the stacked switchbacks, but first there's a couple more spaced out appetizer hairpins before we get there. This is roughly the halfway point, but on Browse I always feel like the second half passes by much more quickly than the first, so you've broken the back of it by this point. The legs were definitely feeling the burn, and I had absolutely no idea how my time was shaping up. Riding at a low cadence definitely makes you just feel and look a lot slower. You'd never see this and think, wow, she's really flying up that climb. You'd be more likely to think that I was totally blown up and was limping to the summit. But just like on the turbo, you can almost fool yourself into thinking the exertion is easier than it is. I'm actually going to spoil the ending and tell you the results while the on-screen effort continues. Here's a comparison with my previous PR, and as you can see, I basically just steadily pulled away from 2023 me throughout the effort, with my final time being almost an entire minute faster. This was a very pleasant surprise, as I definitely didn't feel faster on this day. I guess my fitness is a bit better now, but not significantly so, and in 2023 I took the ride much more seriously, treating it like a proper effort. So I'd say that kind of cancels out the minor fitness increase. My average cadence was 64 RPM versus 2023's 81 RPM. I found that despite my winter experiments, the strange habits haven't transferred to the road, and I do still tend to average around 80. But I do think that if I'd tried to do this ride a few years ago when I wasn't so used to low cadences, it would have been far more challenging to sustain. Here's the fun part of the climb, at least when the roads are dry, which was repaved ahead of the tour. Thought I'd include some dual footage to crank up the nausea factor. Bet you're wishing I just had rear footage now. I didn't realise this at the time, but interestingly my cadence of the entire climb was at its highest during this section. You might normally expect the opposite, as your rhythm is disrupted with the braking around turns, but having been caught out by this earlier in the climb, where my legs got bogged down through a few hairpins, I think I started anticipating that, so automatically just kept it in an easier gear. Which I suppose I wasn't actually supposed to be doing, but that's just what happened. It's followed by the steepest part of the climb, where it briefly touches 10%. Could really feel that ramp up, and I certainly wasn't looking very smooth whilst I entered cross-training territory in my big ring. I think that, generally speaking, 60 RPM would feel increasingly more natural the steeper the gradient, but that would only be the case if it were very consistent, otherwise the variations would be even more greatly accentuated. So going into the final few minutes, I was obviously looking forward to being done with the effort, and while I felt as though I couldn't go any harder, I also didn't feel as deep in the red as I would typically be at the end of a regular full gas effort. It's not much use feeling less tired if you're not actually able to do anything with that and produce more power, so it might just be that my physical limit was exactly the same, and Cadence just altered my perception of the suffering. But it does fairly reliably prove that I didn't suffer many adverse effects from grinding it out. It was uncomfortable, and I would have preferred to be spinning faster at times, but this effort would have been very uncomfortable at any cadence. And I'd venture to say that riding at 60 RPM felt better than 80 would have, at least on this day. Likely just because it was fun to do something weird, and having fun reduces perceived exertion. This is the part of Browse where you get that famous look down on the switchbacks behind you. Don't forget to proffer a grimace to the cameras when you ride over these blue arrows. You'll see them up various passes in the Alps Maritimes department as a part of the Coles Connect 06 challenge. If you're lucky and everything's working properly, it'll automatically take a photo as you ride past, which you can then find online. The road twists further inland on the final approach to the summit, and the finale of Browse is much like the beginning in that you kind of lose sense of the climb. I should also mention that despite never really training low cadence for such a duration, throughout the 28 minutes I didn't experience any power drop off. In fact, pacing wise it was almost identical to my 2023 PR, so it's not like the grinding suddenly became too much to sustain. Usually I try to ramp it up a little at the end. More often than not, it's rather pathetic anyway, but I struggled a bit to really max out the effort here. So that was my slow-mo effort up Col de Browse. I actually really enjoyed it, so I might just embrace the grinding life and get rid of the little ring altogether. The only conclusion that can really be drawn is a very simple one, which is that taking 60 RPM to the roads wasn't a total disaster, and it is still possible to do good efforts at low cadences. I don't have enough data to prove whether it's actually better than regular or high cadences, or what the repeatability or effects on fatigue would be like in comparison, but that would require a lot of testing that I'm not about to do. I'd obviously like to think that I'd go faster than this if I did it all over again without any cadence restriction, but it certainly wouldn't be a significant improvement. As with anything, this is all very individual, and a little more practice and training would lead to different results. It was super interesting to see what aspects of indoor churning carried over to the road and which didn't, but being able to produce good results at low cadences isn't purely limited to the turbo. In an upsetting end to the day, the trusty La Escra and Boulangerie proved not to be so trusty after all, and I departed with pain in my legs, pain in my heart, but a distinct lack of pain in my stomach.